So, David, thank you very much for making the journey from Bristol across to London to come and see me today. I'm really grateful. For those people who don't know you and don't know much about the Andrews business, would you mind just giving us just a brief introduction as to who you are and how you got here?
Yeah, of course. I've been an estate agent since I was in my late teens, and I took the traditional route through estate agency, pretty much into the role that I'm now in. So my journey's included running small offices to regional practices to my own business, and then also had a period through Land and New Homes, which is how I initially joined Andrews. Andrews is a phenomenal business. We're in our 80th year this year, so we look forward to celebrating that success. But yeah, founded by Cecil Jackson Cole back in 1946, and to this day, yeah, we're still owned by a charitable trust. So this whole purpose of Andrews, beyond delivering great service to our customers, is to reinvest those profits back into charitable needs to help those that need it more.
And what's the main focus of the charitable trust? Do they have specific places they want to put that money?
Yeah, absolutely. So the trust will decide where those places are, but they will be also influenced by what might resonate with the property group as well. And a good project to share would be the Established project. So this is where the group took a decision, or the trust took the decision, inspired by the group, to acquire properties through the profits and use those properties to provide accommodation to particularly young people coming out of care. So when they get to 18, rather than just being left to their own devices, they're supported through housing. They're provided with rooms at discounted rates, and they get 2 years to give them a real opportunity in life and a foundation to then go and make it in the real world.
I think that's a wonderful thing. I really do.
Yeah, and the one story that resonates with me there is we had one person come through, went to university, it gave them that foundation to do so, and off the back of that, from quite a challenging childhood through the care system, and now out in the field as a paramedic, and that's a great story to share.
Wonderful. I mean, it must, most SME business owners, so owners of independent estate agencies, they're engaged in their community, but to actually have, a system and a structure and a legacy which has lasted 80 years where you can put the money back into those charitable organisations, I think is really remarkable and must give a huge amount of purpose to you and the rest of the Andrews team.
Yeah, and we see that through the team members. Yeah, the type of person we employ will perhaps be slightly different, but also the opportunities for them to get involved and really feel part of that whole system. So yeah, I think it's there for everyone.
So as part of the research for the podcast, I looked at Cecil Jackson Cole, and, he didn't just found Andrews, the charitable trust, which obviously owns the business, but there's also Oxfam, Help the Aged, which is now Age UK, plus a number of other charities. So Cecil Jackson Cole, I mean, what was his background, which sort of led him to end up founding all of these charities?
We still talk about it now. He was incredibly ahead of his time, I think, in his mindset and the things he was trying to achieve. So back in 46, when Andrews first started, initially it was a furnishing business and he took a slight change of direction. But at that point in 46, to set up a business that was going to sit there and fund charitable needs, even today, if someone set that up, people would look at that thinking that was quite inspirational, but this was 80 years ago. And it's great that the company has managed to sustain those 80 years and still stand here today for it. But and you go back to the early days of Andrews, and there are still plenty of facts out there we still learn as we go through archives. But quite recently, I picked up that they set up an estate agency business on first floor premises back in 1946. So there you go, the first agent online that wasn't online perhaps, but so plenty of other interesting facts that come through that.
Wow, that's amazing. And so your journey, just going back to when you set up your own business, so what was that like when you decided that it was time to step away from working for someone else and set up your own?
Yeah, in many respects that was forced at that point because of what happened to the business I was working in just prior to that. So, but it was something I really wanted to do. I think the world's changed slightly, but you were certainly encouraged to try and make that path. That was an aspiration for many at that point. And setting up your own business, it was 2009, it was challenging. One, it wasn't cheap to set up at that point. It was certainly back in the day still where having an office, you had to have one. You had to be in the newspaper and so on and so forth. So you were opening up on day one with quite high overheads, and that created a certain pressure. But certainly at that point, slightly younger, I would say I'm probably more driven now than then, I think, or short memory, one or the other. But for me, I always felt I was not making it wasn't really a thought process, but it was just how many people I could help, how many houses I could move, and it was just the achievement of building something, and that was probably the inspiration at that point.
Fantastic. Yeah, well, I set up in October 2008, so it was a similar time actually when I
Good times.
opened. Yeah, great times. And so there was sort of, and funnily enough, my last podcast interview guest, when I went through his CV, a guy called Luke Somerset, in fact, you met him briefly over lunch, one of his previous jobs from 2005 to 2007 was for Lehman Brothers in credit and risk. So I had him to thank for my fantastic start with estate agent. So I didn't draw the dots for him because I thought that might be a bit unfair. A fantastic guy, but what a job to work in.
Certainly at that time, it was it was a market you had to create deals for sure.
And the thing is it made us better agents. That's the truth of it. And the harder the market that you've come through, when things do ease off, when we did go outside of 2022 into 2023 and suddenly things weren't selling quite as readily as they had been, those habits, behaviours, tactics that we'd learned back in 2009 are the things which we can then bring to deploy.
Yeah, and I think also setting up in that sort of market, I always viewed it that you could actually gain market share quicker.
Agreed.
In that type of environment. I mean, hard yards, yes, but it was easier to show a point of difference than a market where everything will sell straight away because everyone wants to buy a house. So I think in a way, difficult time for the housing market, but in a way that was perhaps a positive as well, looking back.
It's 100% a positive. So I think that as a general principle, opportunity exists in the opposite direction to the crowd. And so if everyone is closing down their estate agencies, they're slashing their marketing budgets, and no one's opening businesses, and you're the one nutter near Bristol who is opening their doors, then, your ability to claw market share is just so much easier, I think, in a tough market, because you've got all these people who've got a for sale board in their garden, which basically says, trying to sell without success. And therefore, that's an opportunity for you to go out and win that business, and hopefully at a really realistic price.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with all of that. And in some respects, that was you'd be working through this process without really knowing what you're doing. But when you sit back and you reflect, there's lots of learns through that.
Yeah, 100%. So one of the other facets of your career that I was interested in was from your homes experience and landing your homes. And I mentioned to you over lunch that I now work with a whole range of estate agents across the UK in different capacities. And one of the things which I do is I look at their business and I say, right, these are the opportunities. And I would say that now Land New Homes is one of the opportunities which in general I don't push them to go for. Does that make sense? And I'd just be interested in your reflections. What do you think of the Land New Homes business market now, and what was it like when you were doing it as a full-time gig?
Yeah, it's been an interesting period, and I think last year was probably not a great year to be in Land New Homes. You're reliant on the political backdrop, and we certainly suffered from a lack of planning applications in 23 going into 24 that then really impacted what was coming out of the system in 25. For me, it's almost, if we put it in card terms, it's like the game of poker. The wins are great when you get them, but the losses can be equally as great when you're going through a tough time. But when we look at Andrews as a business, it's another string to the bow in many respects. And the Land and New Homes business doesn't just take the benefits from selling new homes or pieces of land. It's what the activity that creates for other parts of the business as well, be it business into our estate management, lettings properties, or valuations generated off of those people needing to sell to buy the new home. So it certainly starts to touch other parts of our business.
So if you were talking to like a regional sized independent, 5 to 10 offices, and they were thinking about setting up a Land New Homes business, how would you advise them to go about doing that?
Firstly, I'd recommend it, but I think if you're truly going to run at it, you're not going to be doing that by getting your staff in your sales offices to be that mechanism. You want something that's completely separated, because it's a relationship building exercise largely. It's a very different field of people. The developers to your local consumer selling a house is a different mindset, different challenges.
An interesting way of phrasing that.
Hey, they might even watch. But it's also a very different social network as well. And so I think, yes, I would certainly recommend it, but make sure it's separate and make sure you put the energy in it. But also don't expect a return overnight, because it's a relationship building exercise, and some of that can take a little while.
Totally. I think it is a phenomenally tough business as part of an estate agency mix, which once it's up and running can be incredibly valuable to the overall piece, as you've described. So for a mature business like Andrew's, the bit which I think is really tricky is for an estate agency business to go from nothing, hiring what is probably quite an expensive head to come in and run that, running it for at least 12 months before they make any money. And it's probably a bit longer. Like deals that you and I would work on today, we probably wouldn't expect to see money for 2 years. Is that fair? Yeah. And if it was, I guess if it's built stock that you've taken off another agent, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's how there are certain ways you can go into that. So look, the dream from a land and new homes perspective is you find the piece of grass. You sell that on, you're then involved in the new homes process, and that could be a 10-year period. I mean, we had one site I remember back in, I think I was involved in pricing the site initially in 2007, and we sold the houses in 2017. Not many banks will support that business plan, but it is long-term, or can be long-term. The important part is trying to find ways of bringing in small parts of revenue during those longer-term processes.
And how would you do that?
I think one area for sure is that your developers out in the field don't want stock plots. So, and the way I initially got heavily involved in new homes was really with my own business, but we would go and look after all the parts exchange business for one of the PLC developers. So it was a big site, it was a mile long, lots of housing, and a lot of people locally moving on to that development. So that created a lot of second-hand homes they needed to sell. And because it was a part exchange, the developer wanted to move quickly, and that helped generate some short-term revenue and move ourselves into that new home field. So as you drive around your local area, you will come across plenty of developers that will be trying to sell houses, will want quicker sales transactions, trying to help them with stock plots. That's your immediate direct route to some revenue, whilst you're building some of the longer term relationships that will bring developments on in 12 months, 24 months time.
So stock plots, part exchanges for short-term cash flow, then sort of taking your big bets for longer returns over a sort of 2, 3, 4, 5 year period.
Yeah, and the most important part is do not chew your time up with stock plots, because you're never going to move to the bit that is actually why you set up in the first place. So always leave plenty of time for business generation, for why you really set up. And the dream is you want to look after that development of 50, 60 houses by yourself, be involved in the marketing, the setup, and so on and so forth. That's why you entered the market. And it'll be very easy to just get distracted, end up in a cul-de-sac of part exchange properties. So that can't be the ultimate goal.
Absolutely. And one of the things which we did in our business was we set up a town planning business to then try and monetize the front end. And as I think I mentioned to you over lunch, I'm also involved in a land promotion business. So there's a symbiotic relationship between the promoter and the planning team, so that then obviously there's advice which can be offered, but then also we can, some of the money which we're investing in the planning application, we can actually reinvest in a sister company, which allows us to then mitigate slightly our expense and what is in effectively a gambling business.
Yeah, and it is a legal gambling exercise. And I think that probably speaks to a lot of our industry. I think for me, when we look at, and I'll pull it into the bracket of property industry. Yeah, property industry 20 years ago, you could have a sales business. Yettins has probably still come out the ground slightly, but you could focus on one part of the business and have a good business for it. And I think now, given the way the world's evolved and probably some of the money that's been drained out of it, you are reliant on multiple income streams. So the more that you got and the more that support each other, then great, you can have a really strong business off the back of that.
And you've got financial services, you say you've got asset management, you've got all of those other pieces of the jigsaw which can have the symbiotic overlap, and especially for big businesses of scale, it's a really, really important piece.
Yeah, absolutely. And we added auctions last year as well, which used to be an outsourced piece of work, but bringing that internally again just gives you a little bit more control. You're controlling the customer journey a little bit better, and by control, I don't mean that in its context of its word, but just to ensure that you are inputting everything you can into that journey to make it as good as possible.
Okay, great. And so, you entered into the Andrews world through a Land New Homes Trojan horse. Then you moved through the organisation as changes were made, and knew your predecessor, Carl. So how did the sort of appointment come about? What did you find when you arrived as the CEO?
I think I came into Andrews in a way that would be slightly unusual. And I guess to be a CEO, if you to come in as I did into Land New Homes, which is really a department that almost looks after itself on the side, given the nature of the work. So it was a great way into a business, being able to look at everything without being involved in anything. And we had some great times building that Land New Homes business. And then shortly, it's about a year after, I then couldn't say no to get involved in a little bit more. So we picked up the, as we call it, ACCS, our corporate client business, and then our leasehold business. And then a year later, and you mentioned Carl there, came into the business as a short interim CEO, and myself, along with Simon Cheetham, who's our Chief Purpose Officer, worked closely with Carl to really change the fortunes of Andrews, and that was an 18 months process. And then towards the end of Carl's 18-month contract, that's when I was appointed as MD, and then myself, Simon, and then we were joined by Jonathan Poole, CFO, and then the three of us really took the lead in taking that business on beyond Carl's time. And then we had a redistribution, just a defining process of really where the three of us sit within that business. And those two work incredibly close to myself, and between the three of us, we managed to get through the week, most of them.
Great stuff. What's, from your point of view, what's your vision for the business?
Yeah, that's a great question, and there's probably multiple answers to that. We touched on just off camera before around how Andrews have been influential in the industry in its past, and I think it'd be great to get back to the point where we're influencing the industry or the customer journey in the near future as well. So I think we certainly have a ambition to give back in that sense, part of Andrew's DNA. In terms of the business itself, it's quite a traditional business. It's got 40 offices, it's got 370 staff. It operates like you would expect a business to operate probably 5 years ago. And the group's come so far in the last couple of years, but really just getting ourselves a solid foundation for the exciting part, which is actually go and do something a little bit different, be brave. And in an organic, controlled fashion. But the future of a estate agency for me is quite exciting because it's absolutely going to change, I would say, relatively quickly. I would say the industry today isn't too dissimilar to the industry I joined. The parts that frustrate me slightly is we still put a property in the window. We still take a front photo, we still take internal photos, we still give out property details on paper. There are a lot of things that haven't moved on really at all. I did start in colour photos, so that hasn't changed. Although we did stick them on. We now print them digitally. What a transformation. But I think the next 5-10 years, it's absolutely going to change. And I think what's quite interesting is seeing the different models of agency that have come about, which I dare say back in 2006, we had online businesses back then, maybe before. I don't think it's just about the change of model, but I think it's the customer journey that will change. I think being far more transparent, far more choice. It's not just here's your fee,
Absolutely.
20-week contract, good luck. I think there will be more choice, there'll be more variation, there'll be greater transparency. I think the traditional brands have got that challenge of making themselves look modern and compete with new emerging brands that might be starting from a slightly different playing field. So exciting times, I think.
And how does that relate back to the Andrews business in terms of, you predict a market over the next 3 years or so where things are going to be different. There are going to be new competitors who are potentially more agile than an existing bricks and mortar business. They're going to be able to react, certainly from a digital point of view, in a really nimble way. They don't have any of the legacy relationships, contracts, stakeholders, in the case of Andrews, to legislate for. So how do you see Andrews fitting into that mix?
Yeah, I think there's pros and cons from wherever you're coming from, because you've got the legacy of past clients that trust the brand, know the brand, and so on and so forth. So that's a advantage versus a new inspiring brand. But I think the most important thing is trying to change really from now. You don't leave it too late. You're not going to change everything overnight, and it's having a clear plan of what that change looks like. Ensure you're always moving forwards. But there's nothing really, looking at Andrews, there's nothing that fits that we can't change tomorrow. Whilst it's 40 offices, great, but it's not that big a business that you couldn't implement a material change quite quickly. What I think we do very well is we bring our team along with that change. And we will often get people involved at a relatively junior level in Andrews to at least have a input. And to be fair, it's often some of the junior staff, or say junior people that have been with us for the least amount of years, that can really inform us on that customer journey and the challenges they have. And it's that information, the consideration of what the future options are, that starts to inform what's the right decision. So I think we sit quite comfortably between, we're not the big Titanic type of business that certainly would have greater challenges, and we have the benefits of something of its size. So I think we kind of sit in a relatively nice position.
I think you do as well. I think it's a nice sweet spot. And I'm going to take a very short break now, if that's okay. And then I'd love to return back to the concept of technology, brand, data, and all of the stuff which, as you know, I'm incredibly passionate about, as passionate as I can be about data. So we'll just take a short break.
Most estate agency CRMs dictate how you work. Greenhouse OS lets you dictate the CRM. Build a tailored interface that fits your agency. Experience a CRM without limits at greenhouseos.com.
So David, one of the things which I love to ask people is about if you were going in and advising a sort of mid-sized estate agency as to the one thing that they should do in 2026 to improve their estate agency business, what would that be?
Yeah, that's great. Love that question. It starts with your people. It absolutely starts with your people. We've worked so hard on our culture within our business in the last few years, and we've seen a significant increase in our transaction level in estate agency. But you need to create consistency. You need to create an excitement and give them something to believe in. So people, absolutely. But I think once you're past people, because that's a problem you've solved and then you manage and maintain, it's then trying to create something that sets a differentiator. Because that's the bit that, why you versus a competitor? I think in the industry, hands up from our part, but we're really not great at illustrating why we're different. And in some respects, we might not be that different. If you spoke to a consumer and got their view, they would often look at it of, you put the property on the portals and then you get inquiries and you sell the house. That's part of it. But there's so much more of which I think we do find it quite difficult to illustrate those points of difference.
100%. And one of the things which I always sort of discuss with listers when I first start working with them is, what do you think your competitors say? So when they go in the house, do they say, I'm going to overprice the property, okay? I'm going to make you promises, which I'm not going to keep in terms of keeping you informed. I'm going to offer you a bargain basement fee. You're never going to hear from me personally ever again. And I'm not going to give you feedback consistently, and I'm not going to give you weekly marketing updates. And how many of the agents which go out in our town say that? And of course the answer is none, otherwise they wouldn't be there. Instead, what do? They go out and say, I offer a great service. I'm going to put it on all the major portals. I'm going to keep you regularly informed about what's going on. And so the consumer sits there with a charming, passionate, enthusiastic person sat in front of them, and they're like, okay, you seem nice. You seem to be taking interest in me, but you're saying really similar things to everyone else who's come through the door. And certainly my own view on it, for whatever it's worth, is you have to demonstrate that you're different. There has to be tangible touch points, which no one else does. And that's part of a process. And every top performing valuer I've ever worked with, when you say, how do you approach a valuation? What do you before the valuation, on the valuation, after the valuation? They can just tell you. And because I think talk is really cheap, isn't it?
Yeah, and you touched on it slightly there. And I think before you get to the valuation, it's what you do beforehand. And I think that experience leading up to the valuation is because you're setting your valuer up for a bit of success at that point. They're walking through the front door expecting to win because of what you've done before you've got there. And yeah, if you don't do the training, you're not going to win the game. So I think that's a key point. And that's something we made a significant change in our business about 2.5 years ago, where we changed the way that people book valuations. And we filtered that away from the offices. So our offices don't get involved in booking that valuation. It goes to a team. One, because we can really control that journey, and we can home in on a smaller group of people and really make it as sharp as possible. And that's certainly seen a monumental increase in valuations being booked, attached to a number of other things we've changed as well. But yeah, we don't miss a valuation call, and that's the important part.
Okay, that's really, really interesting. If I was going to say the same on a lettings business, and obviously we've got the people, we've got the culture. In sort of a lettings business, again, if you're a sort of regional agent, what would you do to drive and improve that?
Yeah, I think, and we've got some area to grow into this. We've done, the team in lettings have done a phenomenal amount of work in the last couple of years. But the big change for us that has got to come is our communication to not just landlord but to tenant. I think there's an education piece to both. There's a huge amount of regulation within lettings and more to come. We've got renters' rights around the corner, started, still to come. How transparent that process can be, and this is where technology can really play a part. Yeah, if a tenant reports a problem, that should be transparent to the landlord, to the agent. The time it takes you to deal with it should be transparent. If you're going to stand by your values, then share it. But also, that making it easy for landlords to get to the most basic information, their statements. You might have emailed them every month, but we all receive bank statements. Well, we don't now, do we? It's all on there. But they should be able to log in and get those. They should be able to see the works that have happened in their property. They should see the communication from tenants, the pinch points, the problems. All of that should be transparent. We're not quite there as a business yet, but that's certainly our motivation to hit that point.
So you've touched on some really interesting stuff there. And just moving it back into the sort of technology space, one of the big decisions which we're going to have to make, when we talk about that 3 to 5 year timeline that we're talking about, that the business is going to be different, is what do we automate and use AI to help us support, and what don't we? What are the nevers and what are the absolutely musts? How do you think about that in terms of your choices, which no doubt you're going to have to make in conjunction with your team?
Yeah, at the back end of 25, we've signed off our 5-year strategic plan, and part of that plan, one small part of it, one part of the big plan is our digital roadmap. So what do we have? Where do we want to get to? And where we want to get to is largely driven by consumers. Our job is to try and fill that in. So yeah, for me, there's probably nowhere AI can go. There probably is today, but the future of it, at this point, we don't know the absolute ability of AI. So I don't think we should be discounting anything in that journey. We might discount it in the short term, but I think that will change as AI improves. And we talked around lunch around the way people receive phone calls from robots or computers, and a change in consumer behaviour. 3 years ago they put the phone down. Now actually, well, if it's given them better information, more consistent information, well, it's a better outcome for the consumer. And so I think we're going to move through that journey quite quickly. And I think through the digital transformation is why our industry is going to change a lot quicker in the next 20 years than it has done in the previous 20.
Agreed. Yeah, the cost, the flexibility, the availability of that technology now, and I guess its capability is just improving and improving. And it's that combination of factors which just creates this really exciting range of possibilities of what could be done. At the moment, there's not a huge amount which has been executed really well, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And for me, one of the challenges with a lot of previous prop tech, not all, but the vast majority, in my opinion, is it becomes an additional expense that doesn't necessarily actually bring in the additional revenue. I think that's going to change with a lot of emerging pieces of tech that come before us moving along the path. But it is a great tool. It looks shiny. You believe that it will do something, but is it going to do something that's material that's going to make a difference, or is it just going to make a process slightly cheaper, but you've still got the same staffing costs, or so on and so forth?
So, I mean, Luke, who we earlier on today, his results are absolutely remarkable with a very targeted deployment of AI. So he's been able to increase his conversion of leads in terms of people inquiring about mortgages to booked mortgage appointments by 70%. So it's 70% better than a human. And he's taken out £300,000 worth of cost because he had 9 people doing that job. And now it's done by AI for basically buttons. So where you're incredibly clear about the objective, and I think there's a couple of other things which have to be litmus tests for people considering AI deployment. Number one, it has to have the full context of the customer. So it can't just be an independent system having a pre-programmed conversation when that person might be a 50-unit landlord. Yep, it's got to know that that person's a 50-unit landlord, acknowledge that and make the customer feel special. The second thing is wherever it gets to in that conversation which it's having, which in the main is going to be text-orientated rather than voice-orientated in my opinion, but wherever it gets to, it's got to be able to execute an action. It can't have to pass it back to a human to book the viewing, book the valuation, book the mortgage appointment. So effectively, it's got to be able to go end-to-end. I can understand everything about the customer. I can have a great conversation with them, whether that's digitally or over voice, but probably digitally. And then I've got to be able to execute the action. And if it can't do those things, I don't think it's useful. That's my opinion.
I agree largely, and I think that's the journey AI's on, because I think a lot of the early parts of AI we've seen, put Luke to one side because I think he's nailed it there with the part we were discussing earlier, but at the moment it's being used in some businesses to solving a short-term problem, but that's never the medium-term solution to the problem they're trying to solve. I absolutely agree with your point. AI needs to conclude it. Otherwise, just stick with your answer machine if that's what you're going to do. So it's got to be able to conclude the transaction it's trying to handle. So if you're booking an appointment and that's what it's in the system for, book the appointment, not a message back to say they're phoning you to book the appointment. So I absolutely agree with that. And I think, how quickly you can put these bits into your business and actually start creating result from it, those businesses will, if quick, will get a small competitive advantage until everyone catches up, because inevitably they either catch up or die, right? So that's the journey many of us are all on.
And I guess the bit which I don't know the answer to is that when you've got a multi-site, multi-branch business, and let's take it outside of the Andrews context and put it into like a Connells type context where you've got 1,000 offices, if the conclusion is that more of the tasks which are currently undertaken by people are then automated, which gives us the luxury of being able to pay people more money, which is great, and that's a desired outcome, certainly from my point of view, but we have less people, then are we then in a position where just active staffing the office could then become more challenging, and therefore could we end up in a position where we rationalise the number of sites? I'm not saying that high street is dead, and because actually I think there's huge value in people working together in big teams. I think that can create amazing culture. What do you think on that?
Yeah, I think the high street's still got a long time to go, and also other emerging areas, i.e., be it retail parks or shopping centres or something. But I don't think the high street or the shop, if we like, is dead for some time. I think certainly in my mindset, and I'm sure many others, how we use that shop or how that shop is available for customers may change. We're probably still guilty at this moment in time to this point. The office has to be open at 9 o'clock and it closes at 6, and don't ever close that door. We are a little bit more flexible as a business. Why sit there and wait for an appointment but can't do it? Go and do the appointment you've been asked to do. So I think you're going to see greater flexibility. The importance of the office actually being manned through that whole day will drop. But I think it will still be there as a place of comfort for consumers. It'll still be an advertising hoarding. It'll still be a place for our staff to go and work in a suitable environment. But I do think the importance of the opening hours will
That's interesting, yeah. I can see that. And I often think it's moving probably from an operational asset into a marketing asset. So that actually the primary value of it is as a signal to a customer that we work in this area, this location, this locality, we're local, we're here, rather than it being an absolute necessity to run the business in the way that maybe in the 1990s that was the engine, the only way that we could communicate with each other.
Yeah, completely. And I think, look, for the feedback we've gathered so far is the consumer does take comfort in that, and I think, we're quite big on raising the standards in our industry. And one of the parts that concerns me with some of the self-employed models, I've got a lot of time for some of the parts they do, but is that customer comfort. Andrews can't just close down tomorrow and run to the hills. Consumers can come and find us very easily. And I think there's if we're going to increase the standards, that has to be part of the consumer output. But I think we are in for a significant change, and certainly, we're reviewing how our teams operate in our branches, and we are going to see some material changes there. But back to your point around staff numbers, and this is a challenge I guess we all have, because we're all look at that and think, well, AI can do this job, we can then use this resource to do something else, and this is part of how we can grow. But we're in an environment where a lot of people will be looking at that the same way, and there's, if you've only got 1 million transactions a year through the England and Wales, well, if that doesn't change, you're all fighting for the same cake, and it's how much of that cake you can take, and we're all competing for the same bit. So there's only so much to go around. So it's going to be hard for businesses to keep growing, and some will be successful and some will shrink. That's the competitive business world.
Absolutely. And again, that sort of comes back to this point about driving revenue per transaction as a primary goal of the business, because ultimately there is a certain number of transactions. That being said, you've been highly involved in a brilliant campaign to encourage the government to look at the reform of stamp duty with the view to reducing the friction, the costs of moving, and therefore by getting more people moving to actually create a bigger market, and therefore all of those ancillary benefits. So what was that experience like of being involved in a sort of, a PR? Is that right to describe it? A campaign?
A campaign.
A campaign to try and shift the government. Was it ultimately a frustrating experience, or was it
it's an enjoyable? As we touched on earlier, that was inspired by previous CEO of Andrews, who drove for higher regulatory change and higher standards and the foundation of creating the National Association of Estate Agents. So you think, well, okay, in Andrews being the CEO, you kind of think, well, it's not just about running the business. You've got to try and make a bigger impact. And stamp duty's been a bane of our lives for many years. And we've, Conservatives, Labour, both played with it. And for me, it's a shame that they can almost politicise this revenue stream to their advantage, or to try and stimulate growth when they want it, take it away when they don't. And I don't think that's right, because all we see is every time a new incentive comes in with stamp duty, we get a massive rush. And then when they take it away, we have a massive cliff edge. And over that period of time, have we had more transactions, less transactions? We probably had about the same. And what have we got? We got a burnt out conveyancing world. We got customers that are frustrated, and estate agents that are struggling, don't understand why they've been done 50% of their revenue to last month. So I think it was, for me, it was trying to find a long-term solution, not just a short-term fix. I think buyers have a unprecedented amount of moving costs, not necessarily upfront, and that's got to change if we're going to help the market move. And for me, the hidden cost in something like stamp duty is a lot of people, not all, but a lot of people will add their moving costs to their mortgage loan. So it's not just the amount of money that they're signing up to, it's the interest they're paying on that for the term of their loan as well. So a £15,000 stamp duty bill for a £500,000 house could be £25,000 that they've actually ended up paying back. So and absolutely there are arguments, if you remove stamp duty, the added boost to the economy will outweigh the benefit to the government for the stamp duty. That's fine in a rising market. In a declining market, the government doesn't have that luxury. So where do they find the £12 billion per annum from there? So it was a great campaign. Delighted to receive the support we did, particularly Rightmove, Zoopla, Phil Spencer joined the bandwagon of it. It certainly came with its frustrations, because we're sitting there thinking, surely everyone wants to support this. And then it certainly had its challenges, because we then head towards the autumn budget. The Conservatives come out and say, well, we would get rid of it. They didn't get rid of it when they were in power. Now they do. And then Labour came out with various ways they might change stamp duty. And that made the campaign quite difficult. And then we go for the autumn budget.
And then in what respect did it make it difficult, just so I understand?
I think when you've got the Conservative Party stating they want to remove it, which was great. And our campaign was not necessarily about moving it. It was certainly shouting for change. And we talked about a deferred stamp duty payment option. So spreading that cost over a period of time without paying the interest on it and making it more affordable payments in the short term. When you have a opposing party come up and say we're going to get rid of it.
Okay, and therefore it sort of took the wind out of the sails of the campaign. Is that what you mean?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And look, I think we'd all rather just get rid of it. That certainly created the challenge. And then, Labour started to talk about a £500,000 cap and so on and so forth. So it ran into that period and then closed down. And I don't think that journey's finished. I think it's probably just reigniting it in a slightly different way to see where that then takes us.
And if you could repeat the process and do one thing differently, what would you, with the benefit of hindsight, is it anything?
Yeah, I think looking back, I think if we took a route with getting a lot of the big players within the industry on board on day one, whether or not that's possible. So actually it's not David Powell, it's not Andrews fighting the campaign, it's the industry fighting the campaign, then we might have got there. That said, we had a bit of a mixed response from the industry, some happily supporting it and some just not wanting to.
And so, if I reflect on the Project 28, which have been championed by Landmark, they created their own brand for it, if that makes sense, which was dissociated from Landmark. And again, to be clear, it's not a Landmark campaign. It is something which then the industry has sort of signed into, and various people have signed the charter, including Preston Baker and Connells, to mention two. But yeah, I wonder if is that the takeaway or not?
Yeah, I think and Andrews have also signed an intent to join Charter 28, and I think anything like this, it improves the system. I think the challenge we've got is quite often in all of these places, Charter 28, so on and so forth, Landmark leading it. Of course, there is that commercial gain, and I think where there's a commercial gain, it makes it difficult for everyone to join the same fight. So I think there is something in this where the industry, whilst I think we're absolutely better today than we were 20 years ago, I think there's a responsibility on a lot of us to actually come together in a way of solving some of these core problems and have a greater alignment in doing so, and getting through that part of someone having a significant commercial gain. That's the driver of the process, and I'm not suggesting Landmark are in that case, but I think if we can come to agreement on some of the key problems and then find the solutions, and that's done collectively, that I think that will get ourselves through some of this.
Okay, really, really interesting, and best of luck in terms of reigniting that campaign. It's certainly something which you'll have Preston Baker's support on, no doubt about it. So David, you've been incredibly generous with your time. I want to thank you so much for coming down all the way across from Bath to have this conversation. And I've really enjoyed it. So thank you so much.
Yeah.
All right. Cheers.
Thank you.